Hello everyone and welcome to another tier list video, and in today's video we're going to be doing a ranking of the discography of, that was a lot of ofs, Charli XCX. Charli XCX is one of my favorite artists. She just has an amazing sound, amazing style, and she has really developed her style over time, and it's interesting to go through her whole discography and kind of see that progression. And so yeah, today we're going to be ranking all of her albums and also EPs. Well, one EP, much like The Weeknd. Obviously, the Vroom Vroom EP is often, considered a part of her main discography, so it's going to be in this ranking, even if it's short. So yeah, other than that, let's just get straight into it. So we're going to start with her debut album from 2013, which is True Romance, and obviously this album's turning 10 this year, and I have to say, for a debut, this is actually a pretty solid album. It's definitely not the same sound as any of her later work, but it's still pretty experimental for an early 2010s pop album. It's almost an extreme version of what 2010s pop sounded like, and I kind of appreciate it for that. But it still very much sounds like Charli XCX and very much has a similar experimental nature and identity to her later works. So while it's not one of my favorite albums from her, I do really appreciate that it was pretty radical for a debut album, and especially a debut album by a pop artist at the time. To name some favorite tracks, I'd probably say Nuclear Seasons, Set Me Free, Stay Away, What I Like. There's some good tracks on here, and I'd probably say it's like a 6 or 7 out of 10. It's probably a 7, probably a 7 out of 10. Which I guess we'll put it in the B tier. Next we have Sucker. I have to say that I think most people will agree that Sucker is her worst project, and that it was very much a step down from True Romance. My main problem with Sucker is that it A, feels far more generic than True Romance, and B, feels just so samey across all of the tracks. Like, there is a set style from the very beginning, and it doesn't ever leave that style. So it gets pretty boring, despite not even being that long of an album. And just in terms of songwriting, in terms of production, there is far less here than any of her other work. I mean, I think that especially on later albums, she's easily become one of the best songwriters in the world of pop. Even if she can't really be considered a purely pop artist, she is an amazing songwriter, and that's one of the things I really appreciate her for. And Sucker just has very bland and uninteresting songwriting, very bland and uninteresting production, and just little of interest across the whole project, in my opinion. I have a couple favorite tracks. The title track's pretty cool, makes for a good intro to the album. Boom Clap is obviously one of the songs that really blew her up, and it's very simple compared to her later work, but it's still a fun song. Doing It I quite liked, and Red Balloon is a fun little bonus track. Obviously it's not really part of the main album, but yeah, this album's like a 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10. It just doesn't do much for me. I guess it's not D tier because, I mean, relatively it would be D tier because, like I said, it's probably her worst album, but I don't think don't think it's a terrible or unlistenable project, so we'll put it in C tier. So moving on to the Vroom Vroom EP. Now, I have a lot of respect for the Vroom Vroom EP because obviously this project is where she really started kind of coming into this experimental space, working with these hyperpop and like bubblegum based producers, and starting to really form what would become the style she was known for. While it's not anywhere close to one of my favorite projects from her, it is still a fun project, and obviously it's pretty short, and I like most of the tracks on here. My two favorites are probably the title track and Paradise. But yeah, it's a short little project. It's very focused on more of that bubblegum based sound rather than the more hyperpop sound that she went for later. But it's still awesome and crazy to go from what I was just saying is a very bland, uninteresting pop album to something this cool. So what I'm actually going to do is say, yeah, I would say this is a 6 out of 10. Like, obviously it's just a short EP, so I don't really rate it as high as her other projects, but I do really still appreciate it, so don't think it being low on the tier list means I don't like it, because I do. Yeah, I think I agree with that. Okay, next we have Number One Angel. Number One Angel is the first of the 2 mixtapes she released in 2017. Obviously, this and Pop 2, which are meant to be kind of companion projects to each other, and were obviously her first full-length projects with a more hyper-pop experimental sound. The one problem I have with Number One Angel is that it doesn't fully embrace that sound yet, whereas Pop 2 really does go into that sound. Obviously, Number One Angel retains more of the style of the Vroom Vroom EP compared to Pop 2, which has its own style. And, you know, I still really respect Number One Angel because it's a fun project and there's a lot of great tracks on here. There's a lot to like about it. And I would say that it's probably my favorite project so far, but not my favorite project overall. My favorite tracks on here are probably Dreamer, Emotional, I Love You Too, White Roses, and Drugs. But I pretty much like every song on here. There's like 1 or 2 that I don't like. But it's still a 7 out of 10 project, and I would say probably, yeah, Edge's True Romance for me. They're on similar levels, but I kind of like this project more. I find it easier to get into. Now, probably my favorite project from Charli is Pop 2. This mixtape is amazing. I was gonna say there's not a single bad track on here. There is one track I don't like, but I find this mixtape to be pretty much flawless and one of the best pretty much my favorite pop album of all time. I can't name anything wrong with this project. It's amazing, and you know, I really love her embrace of this truly weird and experimental hyperpop sound. I was gonna say this is probably her most experimental album, but I would argue How I'm Feeling Now is more experimental. But Pop 2 is her most well-rounded while being super experimental, super interesting, and really playing with some very powerful ideas. And once again, like I was saying earlier, she is an incredible songwriter, and I think this album is the best show of that. Some favorite tracks on here, Out of My Head, Lucky, Unlock It, and probably my favorite Charli XCX song of all time is track 10, which is obviously an early version of Blame It On Your Love from Charli. But I think this version is far superior and is one of her wildest, craziest produced songs, but is just really cool. So yeah, this is going straight to the S tier. Like I said, this is my favorite project from her. Easily a 9 out of 10. It's amazing, and I could listen to this over and over and over again and it wouldn't get stale because it's just so... I mean, this is going to turn 6 years old this year, and it still feels fresh and interesting and new and unlike anything I've heard before. So it deserves its S spot easily. Now, Charli is another one of my favorite projects from her. I think that this album really takes the Pop 2 sound and distills it into something that's a little more palatable, a little more accessible, but there's nothing wrong with that because, once again, the songwriting is still incredible, and it's still a very experimental and very weird project. It's very her, you know. She has a very distinct style and always has, and this project just shows that. You know, there's a couple songs I'm not a huge fan of on here, but it being a longer project, that's even more easily forgiven than it is for the 2 10-track projects. And yeah, no, it's catchy, it's fun, it's got some of the most insane pop songs I've ever heard in my life, and it's just an incredibly well-rounded album. Some of my favorite songs, Thoughts, White Mercedes, Official. My favorite song on here is probably Gone. But I love a lot of the like solo, very like auto-tuned, weird songs on here, like the intro track, for example. So yeah, it's a great project. Well, I wouldn't put it... I mean, it's close to a 9 out of 10. I would probably put it at an 8 out of 10, but it is going to go in the S tier just because it's one of my favorite projects from her. And speaking of my favorite projects from her, How I'm Feeling Now, I mean, this 3-album run is insane. But How I'm Feeling Now is also an incredible project. Obviously, this is her 2020 effort made in lockdown, and it feels very raw in a way that even Pop 2 or Charli don't really capture. Like I said, this is probably her most experimental album, just in how weird the production can get, and I really have to praise the production on this album and all her albums, but especially this one, just because it's so... I like to think of this album as taking Charli and just turning everything up to the fucking max, and it really succeeds at doing that. My favorite tracks on here are probably Forever, Claws, I Finally Understand, Anthems, which is like one of the craziest songs I've ever heard. Pink Diamond is a really cool song. This is a great project overall. 8 out of 10. I'm gonna put it in the A tier because while like I said, I consider both of these 8 out of 10s. I like this one more, and I think it deserves the S tier. But I do love this album a lot, and I think it's just great. And then we have her most recent album, Crash. Now, Crash is interesting because it really is less experimental than pretty much all three of these, but I understand what she was going for and why it's less experimental. And obviously this is her kind of striving for mainstream success on this album, but in very much her own way and in keeping with her own style and in keeping with her incredible songwriting, which is why I appreciate this album and why it grew on me a lot. I pretty much loved all the singles from this album, and then when the whole album came out, I was kind of disappointed with it. But over time, I've listened to it a lot, and this album's really grown on me, to be honest, just because while it's not some experimental opus like some of her previous works, it's still fun, it's still catchy, and it still is amazingly written, amazingly produced. And, sometimes you just have to let artists progress and try different styles, and I think her trying a different style here really paid off, and so I am absolutely fine with this album existing, and I absolutely love this album. I don't love it as much as her previous works, but like I said, I do really appreciate it for what it's trying to do, and there's some great songs on here, like New Shapes. Good Ones is one of her best, like, straight pop tracks she's done. Lightning is awesome. Beg For You. Yuck. Used To Know Me is like a housey track. It's a cool album, and honestly edges the other two in B tier for me. This is also a 7 out of 10, but I think I like it more than these two projects. And yeah, I think I'm happy with this ranking. So yeah, fight me in the comments. I know Charli's got a pretty passionate fan base, so I know I'm going to piss off a couple people. But at the end of the day, I'm a fan of her, you're a fan of her. How we rank her music is arbitrary because I still love her as an artist, and can't wait to see what she does next. Obviously, she's already started teasing some sort of new project, so very excited for that, and very excited to see how her career continues to progress because it has only been getting better and better with time. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. This is my final ranking of Charli XCX's albums, EPs, and mixtapes, and other than that, goodbye, and I'll see you next time.